it taught me a lot about friendships, people, judging characters, interpreting things and whatnot. I'm not saying that I was perfect when I was making that transition. It was definitely a learning curve.
Let's start this thing, fool.
Hello, I'm Sam.
And I'm Amelia.
Welcome back to Ask the Duo podcast. Podcast where we aim to build better mindset for better relationships.
Yeah, and on this week's topic, why are you laughing
I
at me?
know.
This week's topic, we're going to be discussing about this thing that we've been thinking about. Can women be more emotionally expressive than men, or even sensitive at times?
A thing, you meaning topic?
Yeah, topic.
Oh.
Yeah, ding.
You got to put the little light bulb thing.
But that is the question. Do you think women can be more emotional or more sensitive than men?
I think it's case by case, and it comes down to the character, I believe. So I think it can be equal to some degree.
I think it's a really hard one to answer in my point of view. In some terms, yes, women can be more expressive or emotional or sensitive, but I think it applies no matter to what gender, but the way that people express or what they are sensitive towards is very different. So some could be from what someone has said, or some are just very, very high EQ and they can feel the emotions of other people and being empathetic, and they're more sensitive in that way. So I think it's a really hard question to be like it's a yes or a no. There's just different facets or angles that apply to this question.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but first question, do you think that I'm an emotional person?
I don't think so.
But what are your thoughts on that though?
I think there's situations, scenarios where you have the ability to emote often, as opposed to other scenarios where you don't. So, and what I mean by that is basically there are scenarios where you have no expression and you just keep
just
going.
A blank wall.
Yep. And then there are situations and scenarios where you will express yourself, where you are more sensitive, you're more emotional, where you express it.
Mm.
And I feel like that's the same thing vice versa for me too.
Yeah, I think in general, like a broad perspective, you're not a very emotional person. Emotional as in you don't get affected by things very easily, like where you're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out, or like I feel so sad because blah, blah, blah. You're very neutral. You just take things on day by day, one step at a time kind of person.
Yeah.
And most of the time, you don't have a certain emotion to it. You just kind of like, cool.
Yeah, that is pretty true. And I think that there are times where I will be emotional. Not saying that I don't express myself in a way, but yeah, majority of the time it's very much whatever.
But thinking back early in the days though, I think the one emotion that you did have really strong, like a very strong emotion, is your aggression. I think things can fire you up a lot easier back then. Not saying it happened often, but if something did affect you where you got angry, you definitely express that.
Yeah, 100%. And that was in my earlier years. And I think that comes down to maturity. But likewise, yeah, exactly right. When it came to the aggression side of things, I would express that very openly.
In saying that, in terms of how you're saying that I don't really have much emotions or share emotions, why that ties into why I think it's very individual to the person, and there's different things, different angles that people will express things. For me personally, the reason why I don't really express much is just my upbringing, which I think also has a massive influence in terms of if people are more expressive or not, or more sensitive to things or not, because it's a little bit about that resilience that we were talking about. Some people grow up in families where they tell you to don't cry, don't react, or don't whatever, and that kind of builds that resilience where you're like, okay, I can't cry, I can't break down, I can't, and it's nothing wrong with crying or breaking down or expressing your feelings, but that is exactly how I grew up. I was in a family where it wasn't just about the negative things, it wasn't just about the sadness, the anger, it was even being happy. I wasn't allowed to show that because there was examples where I think as a kid, as a person, I'm just a very happy, cheerful, like bubbly kind of person. Like deep down inside, that's just how I am. But for the people that know me, like what you're saying, I'm not very expressive. But if I'm in a very comfortable environment and something actually is making me happy, like even as simple as just getting my favorite food, I would be like, oh my God, this is like the best thing ever. This is so good. My craving's satisfied. But when I was a kid and I expressed these kind of feelings, I would immediately be told, be quiet or like, don't be too excited. Everyone's watching you. And that over time just has been suppressed. So over time, if I wanted to show any emotion, I just knew I can't react.
Yeah, and I think that's a similar experience. In my earlier years, I was always told by family and the surroundings of family to just not show my emotions and don't be sensitive to people and whatever that's happening.
Even being happy,
Yeah, even
like
even
excited about
like just
something.
I guess anything, just emotionally, you can't really show much. I think for guys, I guess that stigma of being like you've got to be strong and whatnot, and keep moving forward without really thinking.
Mm.
And then for me, as a kid, I used to cry a lot as well. And I remember I used to be confused because it's just like, well, people are telling me, hey, don't cry.
But was it mainly your parents or just everyone, relatives?
Everything, relatives, family and friends, your parents. And it was just that constant echo of, hey, don't express yourself, don't show your emotions, don't cry because you can't be weak.
Mm.
And I remember feeling like shit, I feel a certain way and tears would just come out and I'd be confused.
Confused as in you're trying to hold yourself back because you know you're not meant to cry.
Yeah.
You're still crying kind of
Yeah,
thing,
pretty
or
much. Yeah. So it's kind of like a mind fuck. You're like, well, hang on, my emotions and my body's showing a certain way. But in my head, I can imagine like pictures of people saying, yo, man, you can't do this and that. And I'm like, fuck. You know what I mean?
yeah, that brings back to the point into again why I think gender doesn't play into this, like who's more sensitive or not, because exactly that. I just thinking back when, because my brother's quite a similar age to me, and he also cried a lot. And I just remember my dad would be like, "Don't cry, like why are you crying?" And pretty much saying like, look at her, as in like pointing to me, like she never cries and things like that. And I can just imagine how he would have felt because he really did wanted to express what he's feeling. Like
Yeah.
he is actually sad at the time, but being compared to someone else, and you're like, okay, even a girl isn't crying, like I shouldn't be crying. So it's just feeling those kind of things, and I could just imagine what thoughts would be going through his head at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And I think it's not just crying, it's just expressing your feelings.
Mm.
I think that was the primary, I guess, focus. Don't express anything.
I think that's a very traditional way of upbringing, especially in our culture too, which we do have a study that we will bring up a little later on in the conversation. And it was actually some studies done by, I think it's a group of Chinese people, and they studied psychology and they were just talking about the Chinese culture and just suppressing emotions. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. But another angle why I'm saying like it's just very different, if I was to compare me to you, and especially when we are having conversations or if we had any disagreements, I'm definitely the more expressive one and I can see things in a deeper level. Whereas you sometimes, it's not that you don't have the levels of expression or things that you think about. Like I'm more sensitive to some things as opposed to you. So we joke around a lot and we both pretty much give each other shit a lot. Majority of the time, I don't care, but sometimes when you cross the line, obviously I'm sensitive to that. And there's definitely that kind of level of different sensitivities. And I think that just applies to everyone.
Yeah, everyone's different though, right? That's just the way they either communicate but receive and perceive the information. So if I were to tee into the conversation and say, look, what I think in terms of our relationship specifically, I definitely would agree that you have the ability to express your emotions. So you're probably a little bit more sensitive in certain situations as opposed to what I would be. And I think that also is lit up from my upbringing and also my experiences in life. But as I grew up, I feel like I've switched that. I switched that off to be less of a emotional and sensitive person.
But would you like to be more expressive though, or did you purposely switch that off?
I think I purposely switched it off because not because of the relationship. I'm just saying as I experienced life, I feel that the less sensitive and toned down of expressing your emotions, the more that you can stay focused in my experiences. Even though, yeah, that could seem like perceived as a negative thing as well. You know what I mean? Like people who are from the outside or third perspective would see that and be like, whoa, shit, dude, like that's probably not the best way to approach it.
But do you think you're suppressing your emotions then if you're doing that?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Mm. But do you feel that it's affecting you in any way, or do you feel like it's kind of fine to be doing what you're doing?
Like everyone's different. I think for me, it's very much like, okay, if you feel a certain way, you need to understand what that feeling is. Because if you don't understand what that feeling is, then potentially that's going to screw up.
Yeah. I think just coming from a third party or someone just being your partner, I can definitely see that just through our disagreements in the past, there's a lot of times where you're a person that's very direct, which is really good. I think that definitely helps you in terms of expressing what you're feeling. When something's not right or something's not, you don't feel or agree with, you will express it. But
Mm,
there are times where you will hold on to whatever you're feeling or thinking for quite a while before you actually bring it up. And then sometimes I'm like, you could have brought that up earlier so that we can discuss it. So I can see where you're suppressing it at times, but when you truly already definitely know the answer or something that you're confirmed that you don't agree with, you'll say it straight away.
yep. I feel like if you're less direct and you beat around the bush, then it affects everyone that's around you. And what I mean by that is if there's a problem and you need to fix the problem, if you're not direct and you go around the bush, you kind of like put up a wall of what really the problem is and you beat around that issue, it could mislead the other person and it could also screw you up because now you're still feeling the same thing and you feel like you're not really getting what your true feelings out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's good that you're very direct. But when you are being very direct, have you ever like do things cross your mind where you're like, oh, maybe that person might get offended, or do you have those kind of thoughts, or you're like, I just need to get this thought out?
I think in my earlier years, probably not. I think in my early years, I was direct and I didn't give a shit because I would tell you straight away what I felt.
Mm,
And that was partially because in my experiences I had to force myself to be like that. Like I was saying, like in when I was younger, I was very sympathetic, I was very sensitive, I was very much thinking of the other person, so I would beat around the bush, I wouldn't be honest, I would be like, yeah, look, I'll do whatever you want. And then it took a bit of time for me to realize, hey, it's not right for me personally. So I had to change the way I communicated. I had to change the way I am as a person. So being direct. And it was probably a negative thing, like to some perspective, right? Being so direct where you don't give a shit what the other person thinks. You just tell them how it is.
being direct is nothing wrong. I think it's also how you deliver it. And I
Correct.
think because during I'm just talking about the experience that I've seen with you firing up. It's you actually were firing up while being direct, but sometimes you can be direct and composed at the same time,
Yeah.
which is kind of closer to what you are now, more composed and direct. Whereas back then it
Well,
was just like, you're an idiot. Like, why'd you do that?
yeah. I think definitely in the early years, I couldn't control my emotions in the fact of how I delivered what I was trying to say. I
Yeah.
was very direct and I was very much aggressive. And I think people definitely who, I said shit to would have misinterpreted for sure or got upset from that.
Well, that's really good that you learnt or even somehow taught yourself to change that, because that is the biggest issue that I've had pretty much all my life and I still struggle with it today, is that I've just been told and grew up learning to suppress my emotions to the point that sometimes I don't actually understand my emotions. Like if I was to be angry or if I was annoyed by something or frustrated or feeling sad or something, any of those emotions, the first thing that comes to my mind is like, is it my problem? Like,
Yeah.
is it something wrong with me? What am I feeling? I don't get it. And I'm always picking apart all these different thoughts that I'm thinking, but it's always about me. And it's about me in a way where I shouldn't tell anyone about this or I shouldn't tell people how I feel because
You're
in
the
the
problem.
I'm the one
Yeah.
that's wrong, which is a big problem because you do have the right to feel frustrated. You do have the right to feel
Yeah.
angry, but like I've definitely worked on it now where I can sort of sense what's happening, but I still get those thoughts where it's like, okay, if I speak up, then I'm going to be judged, or I'm saying the wrong thing, or if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to lose my friends, or I'm going to lose the connection. And that's like a big problem. And I have heard from other people as well where they've gone through something similar.
Yeah, and that's something that is a common thing, right?
I don't know if it's common. I've heard of a few other people who have it, who's grown up in a similar cultural background. And I think that's just, the traditional way. Whether or not it's in the Chinese culture or whatever, I think it's a very traditional thing, is just to suppress your
Yeah.
emotions.
And that's why I was lucky enough to understand, hey, I need to change that in my earlier years. And from flipping a switch from being very sensitive and suppressive, well, like not really suppressing, but being sensitive to not being sensitive and just being aggressive, it taught me a lot about friendships, people, judging characters, interpreting things and whatnot. I'm not saying that I was perfect when I was making that transition. It was definitely a learning curve, and it just takes time and experience to really change that direction of where you want to express yourself. Like you were saying before, you're still trying to manage how you're feeling yourself, expressions, your emotions. You're doing pretty well now. Like, obviously, being in a relationship with you for a long time now, you've changed a lot in terms of how you used to express yourself, how you used to communicate. And I think it's all a learning curve.
Yeah. I think I'm a person, because of this emotional suppression, I'm a 0 or 100 kind of person. So I would either say nothing or I will actually blow up. And I think that's signs of unhealthy relationship with your own emotions, because you just don't know how to control it. You don't know, or you bottle up until the point where you just got nothing but to blow up. So I think that's just how I've always been. And going on to another level, it's a fear. Like for me, I have that fear of blowing up, because then again, I'm thinking, what are people going to think of me? People think I'm crazy, because all this time they knew that I'm this calm and understanding person, but now
Mm.
I'm blowing up. There's like another thought that adds to this whole emotional suppression. Yeah, again, it goes into a cycle where I'm like, I feel bad because I blew up on someone, and being like, you did this and I'm angry about this, and like I hate this, and like, you have all
Yeah.
these kind of thoughts, and it's just like a negative circle.
Yeah. That's why it's important try to understand your feelings and talk about it. What I mean by that is basically if you're in a situation where you feel something, you have to talk about it. Then the other person who you're talking to could explain or even decipher what that means. That way you can develop what is the middle ground of how you feel.
Mm.
And look, this is personal experience in the fact of I had to figure that out too. I used to be a 0 to 1,000 as well, and just trial and error to be able to figure out what that middle ground is.
Yeah. But I think one good side, not saying that the emotional suppression is good, but the things that you've learned and things that you develop over the time after doing all that, I have become a more understanding person and more patient. I think I've always just been that kind of person due to this emotion, because you get more time to sit with your thoughts. So you're not just being like, hey, I don't agree with that, or hey, I don't like this, because you actually sitting there thinking about the situation and you understand things, so that the other person doesn't get your backlash straight away. And
Yeah.
if you really don't agree with it, you have some time to sit over it and then go reach out and be like,
Yeah.
hey, this situation, I didn't like it. So there are some good things that came out from it, but at the same time, there are some times where I could express my feelings a lot earlier.
Yeah. And that's why I'm a massive advocate about professional development, because professional development in your own career growth and development in your own individuality, if that's the right word, where you're basically working on yourself, but you're working on your career. That forces you to, well, one, understand others. See, being in a professional workplace, you understand who your colleagues are, how they act, characters, and stuff like that. And working on yourself at the same time, you get to understand, you're exposed to different people, how people act, different, managers, different colleagues. Everyone's different. And you have to work with them on a professional level where there's going to be tough moments at work, and you're going to figure out how the fuck do you deal with that shit. There's going to be moments where there's time deadlines, SLA time frames, periods where you're going to have people yelling at you, customers treating you like shit. And it's all about dealing with those moments.
Yeah, because if you're professional, you can't just lash back at someone
Correct.
who's yelling at you. You have to be professional and hold it in, and just trying to attend to the situation in a calm and composed manner.
Correct. Yeah. And all those moments and experiences is what teaches you, what builds you. And I can fucking put my hand up and say, like, when people used to go off at me, for whatever service I used to provide, I used to give it back to them. And it was bad, man. Like I remember I used to work in retail, and this guy was racist to me and said, "Oh, you cook dogs, you kill dogs and eat dogs."
The hell,
And
that's so
I
mean.
I I didn't aggressively reply. I just said, "Mate, you're a complete fuckhead." I'm like, yeah, you can't assume that all Asians do this, right?
Yeah.
It was like a full straight up blunt ignorance. And yeah, there was better ways to handle it,
Did you
but
get in trouble for that?
no, I didn't.
Oh.
Luckily, I didn't. Yeah, just the way I handled it at that time was not the best way, but those situations teach you.
Yeah. But at least you've learned from that and you know now that that's not the right way
Oh,
to
of
reply.
course. Yeah, yeah.
And like definitely no one deserves to be called out like that by any customers.
And not just that, but like even like, managers who mistreat you, blaming you for making error and things like that. And you're strongly, you're sensitive about your work. You work your ass off. You're emotional about it. It's about, okay, how do I deal with it? How do you prove that you actually did the right thing?
But in saying that though, going back to like the men and women being more sensitive or not, do you think, I'm not saying that this happens or assuming, but do you think men are more expressive in a way of anger and women are more expressive in a way of either like crying or showing that they're sad or disappointed? Because I'm just thinking of like movies, and when you talk about like work sense or when something happens, it's always, most of the time, it's like men who either like fire up or get angry or like trash something because they get pissed off, and then women are more like about crying and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I personally feel like men, just from what I've seen, men are probably more expressive in the aggressiveness, right? The dominance and the anger. Yeah. But females are more empathetic. They're more sensitive to, those situations where it's more sensitive. And I'm sure people out there would probably disagree.
but why do you think that happens? Like, why do you think
I
men are more expressive in terms of anger, and why do you think women are more sensitive or just empathetic?
I feel like because females are more caring, like their nature is more caring.
Yeah, it's just in their
They're
nature
yeah,
to
in their
nurture
nature
and
to nurture and and take care and whatnot. So I feel like they
they're crabs.
they gravitate towards that more. And that's not just a female thing. I've seen men who do the same thing. There are guys out there who are fucking nurturing.
Which is why I did say it's all based off the atmosphere, what they grew up in, the upbringing, because I have met many men who are also really sensitive or just empathetic, who just are really understanding, caring, nurturing.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe, yes, they are very nurturing and empathetic, but the way they express themselves in that category is slightly different
Mm.
to like maybe females. But I have also seen females who are very aggressive.
Which is also could be from past experience, something
Yeah.
that they've gone through, something that they understand that they can't be quiet about. Or
Yeah. So I mean, look, I've seen both. Yeah. I don't like saying it's very much a male or female thing.
yeah. So from that, we both did some research. I just want to bring out some few points. So there was a few studies that we looked at. The National Library of Medicine did a few studies. And this first one, they said women reported a more negative problem orientation and engaging in more thought suppression, a type of cognitive avoidance. Thought suppression and negative orientations were found to make a significant contribution to the predictions of worry score. So this was more around like, do women worry more than men? So they were just saying the reasons behind that is because women sometimes have more negative problem orientations, so they might tend to see things in a negative point of view or like worry about things a bit more than men, and engaging in more thought suppression. So they're kind of like, it's harder for them to think about the things and break down the problems and kind of reflect on it. Get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's hard for me to explain, but that's kind of my understanding of what they were saying.
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that women tend to worry a little more,
Emotionally.
just in general?
I think females probably think about the scenario and situation probably a little bit longer than males. And I don't know what that has any relevance to being the gender or whatnot. But I feel that, yeah, there are moments where they tend to dwell on it. They tend to just stick to it and think about it for too long.
I wouldn't say too long. I think they think about it in more layers than men might.
Yeah, but I think the problem with that is if you're thinking about it and reflecting about it, you're digging yourself a bigger hole.
I wouldn't say there's a problem with it though. Sometimes you do need to think about situations a little longer, or not longer,
Mm,
but just deeper so that one, it can help solve the problem. Like, yeah, they might be
mm,
thinking about it a bit longer, but at least you come to a solution.
yeah,
But sometimes if you just overlook the problem, then it doesn't get solved or it might happen again, if you get what I mean.
yeah, yeah. There's no solution because it's consistently
But I
same.
can see what you mean. Like some people do sit on a problem for a bit longer, as opposed to I think men are just kind of like it is what it is, like moving on, kind of positive thoughts, but at the same time,
There's a negative side to it too.
yeah. But the next part that I thought was really interesting, that was part of the same study. It was saying, however, when both variables were controlled, as in these people were controlling their thoughts or understanding the problems and having control over negative thoughts, the significant prediction of gender to worry disappeared. So I think what it's trying to explain is when both the negative problem orientation and thought suppressions were in a controlled across everyone, like doesn't matter if it's male or female, that worry score, as in who worries more, who worries less, just disappeared.
Yeah, so it's just basically saying, it really comes down to your individuality, knowing how you truly feel and reflecting on that. Gender doesn't mean shit, basically.
Yeah, I think it's just having a healthy relationship with your emotions and understanding either being a more positive, having a glass half full kind of approach to life or feelings, and also talking through your problems or talking through your thoughts, like not even problems.
You know who you are, you understand your feelings. Let's just say a scenario where, shit's going wrong, something like, maybe you're not doing well at work and you're depressed and you're sad about not performing. So you understand your feelings, right? You can reflect on what the problem is. So you're able to basically understand your emotions, you understand the feelings that's going on at that set moment, right?
Yeah, and then there was another study. This one was really interesting. So this is the one that I was talking about, that I think it was a group of Chinese or similar culture. They were psychologists who studied emotional suppression. The previous study was talking about thought suppression. And this one was saying that males adopt more rational coping and emotional expressive suppression. What I'm trying to get at is that females tend to suppress their thoughts. So if they're having certain things, they might sit on it a bit longer, won't really talk about it. Whereas guys have been brought up to be more emotional suppressive. So that's what we were saying about how parents might be like, don't cry, you're the man of the house, you can't show blah blah blah. So this study was just pretty much saying that men are more emotionally suppressed. Emotionally
Yeah.
suppressed.
Which I think it makes sense in this scenario where it's very much like cultural background, but not just cultural, but your
Upbringing.
upbringing surrounding that. I think it does have a relevance because just in our experiences, or my experience, sorry, you're not a man,
How
but
do you know?
but just being less emotional, like fuck your feelings, you got to keep going, keep forward, don't cry. Yeah, I think it does have a relevance, and it's probably more prominent over in Asia.
Well, even though this was a study for like specifically talking about the Chinese culture, I kind of feel that if we're moving way back, like way, way, way back, I think no matter what culture, that's just the norm where they think men
Yep.
have to be the strong ones. Men have to be the people who keep their emotions together. They can't break down, they can't
Yep.
cry, those kind of things. So I feel like even though this was a study on the Chinese culture, it applies to everyone back then. Obviously, times have changed now, but I do find that that's true.
Yeah.
One other thing that came from the study, I was just in like this little loop of research. It showed that people who are introverted versus extroverted also have different levels of expressing themselves. So they were saying people who are more extroverted tend to be more expressive, as opposed to people who are introverted don't show their emotions or don't talk about their feelings as much.
Which makes sense because
I
if
never
you're
thought of it like that, but I think
yeah,
that's quite true. And I think this, for me, I feel like this makes more sense as opposed to talking about male versus female.
yeah. So I guess yeah, is exactly that. But I also think that even if you are extrovert, you might have the characteristics of someone who may not be capable of fully being sensitive or fully being able to emote in certain topics or situations,
Mm.
even if you are an extrovert.
Yeah, that's true. And it still goes into deeper levels, though. You could be very expressive, maybe very excited, very happy about something, really love talking to people and talking about how you feel. But then when it comes down to maybe being more empathetic, that might be different as well. Or maybe trying to understand from someone's point of view, that's also different as well. So there's like so many different levels, and you can just get into deeper and deeper conversations about every single angle. But I think every individual has different ways of expressing certain things, and it's all different, and it's also from their experiences.
Yeah. So, I mean, long story short, I don't believe gender is the sole definition of whether we can be, whether females or males are more emotional or
Mm.
sensitive. I just think it comes down to who you are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think the only reason why this topic comes up, or how why people see this, is just a bit of the tradition, how men are brought up. Like back then, women weren't allowed to speak their opinions and weren't allowed to speak up. They weren't allowed to show certain things. They're just made to help the family, be the housewife, that kind of thing.
Mm.
So that kind of blends into why this happens, and then vice versa. Men were meant to be the man of the house, had to go out. They're going to be strong. They can't break down, so that also blended into what's happening now. And I think that's why this thought or this stereotype has come across, because of those kind of things.
Yeah. And I mean, times changed. Like you said, everyone's very open to have conversations.
Yeah, I think today's like such a great time because
Yeah.
everyone's encouraging people to be more expressive or be strong and take care of themselves in a way where if something doesn't feel right for themselves, they speak up. And I think people are encouraging that. And I think that's a good thing to see.
Yeah. No matter what gender it is, man, you can do it.
Yeah, so that definitely was a really deep conversation. I think it brought me back into some things, that moments that I've forgotten about, and just emotions that I used to feel, and brought back memories. But I think it's, yeah, definitely a good thing that now everyone is pushing to just express themselves more. And definitely, if there's things that you're thinking about or things you're feeling, it's good to talk about it, be open about it, obviously with respect and not lashing out, which are things that we've learned ourselves. But let us know what you think about this topic. We're really curious about what you think. Did you experience things that were different between genders or
Even
your
culture.
culture,
Yeah.
yeah, culture differences? But I think that's it for now. And thank you for watching.
Peace.
Bye.